Well, folks, I found my way into the podcast. You knew I'd be back. I'm your executive producer, Saul Spady. I'm joined for the second part of the conversation here in St. Paul, Minnesota. We have Eric from Impact Power Solutions. We have Jonathan from the Bipartisan Policy Center. They make it hard on me, but I do my best. Jonathan, I want to start with you because you set up this entire conversation. We just had a congressman come in. We had the Conservation Coalition, which is funding this project, and their leaders have a conversation about how we can have bipartisan climate action. How do you feel kind of watching that conversation go down? Did it feel good?
It's very fulfilling, very gratifying to see a member of Congress talk with a conservative spokesperson for the environment and actually find common ground.
Well, and that common ground in this case was about Impact Power Solutions. You're a business here in St. Paul, Minnesota. You have solar panels, I think, hidden up there on that roof. First off, you're a business. Talk about the business side of solar, what this business does, and why it's so important for you to keep investing in clean energy.
Yeah, so Impact Power Solutions, we've been around it'll be 30 years in January. We focus on commercial and industrial applications, so we do a lot of work with folks like Target Corporation and Cargill here locally. And what we're kind of seeing, at least in the next handful of years, is we really are talking about certainty, and we really look toward our federal and state politicians to help create that environment for us to grow.
Well, I really understand that. I'm from Seattle, Washington. It's actually, I think, my first time in Minnesota, so I'm kind of realizing how nice everyone is here. It's really different than the Seattle freeze, but we have to build bipartisan coalitions to create laws that are consistent. Can you speak a little bit about your work at that, Jonathan, and why, if we had consistency for a business like Impact Power Solutions, it helps them grow their clean energy project and portfolio?
Right. So like anything in life, politics is about relationships and bringing people together who don't know each other necessarily or don't understand one another's policy beliefs and getting them to find that common ground. So we established at the Bipartisan Policy Center a few years ago a program called the American Congressional Exchange, where members of Congress who want to participate agree to spend a day or two in another member's district of the opposite party, somebody who's different from them culturally, politically, geographically, and from that shared experience come away with a new constructive relationship. We've had a number of those kinds of visits to a district that revolved around issues of climate change, on other environmental matters. Last week we were in Charleston, South Carolina, going out with two members of Congress, one a Republican from Kentucky and the home state member in Charleston, South Carolina. And we went out on a boat at high tide to see what real sea level rise looks like. And for the congressman from Kentucky, who isn't on a coast, obviously, this was an eye-opener. This was something really valuable for him to begin to understand.
Well, that bipartisanship, that type of adventure builds trust, and that's what we're doing on the electric election road trip. When we've been going across the country, what I've been really struggling with, and I think, Eric, you have a really great comment on this, is this concept that rural America almost feels a little bit bludgeoned. Like, they love their land, some of them have like multi-generational farms, and they're being told like they don't care about their environment, and then there's no one kind of highlighting the great work that they're doing in both the rural area and the urban communities aren't kind of listening to that. What you do for solar, you're doing it in both urban and rural. How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, so we've been hard at community solar, which is a program that brings energy from kind of these rural areas into the urban core, and so the utility will help to broker these relationships where landowners have land, they create energy with solar panels, and then that gets put onto other people's bills. Credits onto their bills. And so what we're seeing is that landowners in these rural areas are benefiting from these projects by getting increased revenue for their land, which is often 2 to 3 times what they'd normally get from agriculture use. And then the counties are seeing increased property taxes. They're seeing just increased economic development in their area. So it's those are the types of solutions where we're bringing in bill savings for people that live in the urban areas, and we're also seeing economic solutions in rural areas as being an opportunity to help kind of bridge that gap.
From the bipartisan solution, obviously, conservatives are often from rural communities, liberals are from urban communities. How important is it to keep pushing these elected officials to take these adventures to really almost simulate what we're doing here on the Electric Election podcast, going, from a tribal leader in Sequim talking about salmon management to, forest management and cross-laminated timber. Why is that the key in your mind?
We often say at the Bipartisan Policy Center, Sal, that you don't really know where someone's coming from until you actually know where they're from. And by going to that district and beginning to understand, oh, now I get it, why that member of Congress thinks the way they do, votes the way they do, speechifies the way they do, you begin to then develop this very close connection. Again, it's about the relationship building and those intangible qualities of trust that need to exist in order for you to sit down when you're back in Washington, roll up your sleeves, and actually create legislation.
Right. Well, legislation that's almost enacted then at a local level. I think a lot about incentivization versus forcing businesses to get involved. You talked about how we can really help farmers to get more value out of their land. It's one of the most serious things I think that was said to me on this trip is a young woman who's been working on farms. She's working in farm science, said, if you're selling corn in Minnesota this year, you probably lost money on your entire crop. That is a devastating statement, and we need to somehow get the government involved so we can incentivize them to build wind turbines, to put in solar farms, so that when we have a bad corn year, our farmers still are surviving and economically viable, because we need to be a country that's growing. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's about diversification, right? And landowner rights. Landowners want to be able to do with their land what they want to do, and oftentimes we're seeing certain areas be absolutely ideal for solar. And so just like having fertile soil, it's having fertile land for renewable energy. And so we're starting to see that tide turn, and a lot of folks are excited about it. What you mentioned about corn prices also, we're starting to see people really talk about what's the value of restoring health to the soil. There are some of these other kind of less tangible benefits to clean energy, which is basically restoring the land from having been turned over year after year. How can we look at some of those solutions to help build the economic case even further for clean energy?
And I want to get into the weeds on solar just for a second, because I think it's really fun. We all drove our Tesla here. We're driving a Tesla across America, and one of the things that kind of shocks me is that our 2018 Tesla goes 200 miles, but the new one that's going to come out in 2020 could go 2021 could go almost 400 miles, according to Elon Musk, if he hits his kind of battery advancements. Where does battery advancement stand in solar energy? And then, for those who are listening, they're not going to realize it either, other than they heard an airplane that hasn't decided to go electric yet, yep. So it wasn't quiet. But if they're watching, they're going to realize that we're outside. How has solar made advancements on batteries, and then let's say gaining energy when it's cloudy right now? Because you're still gaining energy right now.
Yeah, we're in this exponential growth curve for both batteries and solar. So what we like to kind of liken it to is that batteries are probably about 6 years later than where solar was 6 years ago. So we're going to see hockey sticks continue in that direction. So a couple of my favorite stats on the solar side is that in the last decade we've seen 99% of all solar that's been deployed has happened in the last decade. And that is just going to absolutely continue on with batteries as well. And in batteries' case, in solar we talk about efficiency and the price, and the same thing with batteries. It's how much power can we pack into a given space, and that is improving dramatically as well.
And we know, being in Minnesota, that hockey sticks are pretty important.
Oh yeah, we can't escape them.
Well, I got to say, in Seattle, I get to say this now. We're going to beat you with the Kraken real soon. This is going to be really exciting. I get a little worried though, because it sounds like we're making incredible strides on the product and the technology in your business, but we're not getting more efficient at bipartisanship right now.
Well, I would challenge that notion. We think that, especially freshman members of Congress, of which Congressman Phillips is, they have a new outlook. They are not perhaps jaded like a member of Congress might be if they've been in office for 10, 15 to 20 years. And we're finding among this new crop of members, that there is a genuine interest on both sides of the aisle of really coming to Washington and wanting to get things done, and understanding that in order to do that, it is about that connection and relationship that is necessary in order to make it so.
Well, to be fair, I see that with the Conservation Coalition, with Benji and with Danielle and their entire organization. I'd ask you, Eric, how can we take their organization and the students that are all across the country, the young people that want to take action, congressmen like Congressman Phillips, who is here with us, and how can we help you get into a situation where we can get legislation that incentivizes solar build-outs for farms? What could best assist you at this point as this industry is going to explode?
Yeah, it's definitely at the grassroots level. I remember in 2013, in Minnesota, we had a bill called the 2013 Solar Jobs Act, and it was a coalition of all sorts of different advocacy groups that kind of came together, a groundswell, to pass the community solar law. And so we talked a little bit about it earlier, and that is the power and the testament to getting people energized at that most basic level.
Well, this makes me, I'm glad that we have the bipartisan group here, because I got to ask you a question myself. I used to be a conservative talk radio show host, but then I identify as a pro-growth progressive. Yeah. What I love about this project is almost everyone we sat it down with, whether they're on the right or left, they keep on saying it's so simple. We have to grow. Our business has to grow. We have to do better. We have to be more efficient. But then we also need to invest in our environment. And so as we grow, we invest. How does that message resonate with both Democrats and Republicans? And is that where we can really hone in and drive more bipartisan work?
Yeah, I mean, it's really an interesting, cross where you've got the market in one place that, as Eric and I were talking earlier, has really moved in a direction where for renewable energy, for solar, for wind, I don't want to say it's at the point where you don't need the tax incentives, but the market is really driving it and is really now competitive and even below the cost of fossil fuels. So the market is sort of taking care of itself. On the other hand, you still need some government incentives, whether that comes from the state or the federal level or both, in order to accelerate the production of renewable energy and to give confidence to the market that there is enough behind them financially in order to grow.
And to make the long-term investments necessary to get to a place where, maybe we can have a carbon-negative Washington state, a carbon-negative South Dakota, using wind power. I would almost push to you on the issues of solar. For those who aren't aware, what are the really exciting trends or jumps in your technology space that get you excited? And then I'm assuming you're really passionate about renewables in general. We've talked to a lot of people who said we can't just focus on solar or wind or nuclear. We have to focus on all of them because the problem's so big. Outside of solar and those advancements, what do you really geek out about in the renewable energy space?
I'm like a total nerd when it comes to technology. That's what drew me to the space 14 years ago when I started in clean energy. And I think that there are all sorts of different technologies out there that are on the horizon, especially including hydro. Like a lot of people wouldn't guess hydro is the #1 renewable energy source in the country. But I'm going to take this moment because you introduced it, but so I am just wrapping up this book. It's getting released on October 18th. It's called Clean Wave.
Can I get a copy?
Oh, yeah,
is this my copy?
This is it.
Yeah?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh,
there you go.
Yeah,
I'll sign it before we leave. But yes, Clean Wave, a guide to success in the green recovery, talking about how clean energy can fit into a post-COVID and into a more racially just future. In the United States, and it talks about all sorts of different technology, all sorts of potential positions that are open for potential job seekers, and it's really geared towards those folks that are either coming out of college or looking for a mid-career switch. And tons of information there at cleanwavebook.com.
Well, and I'm curious, just get a little bit deeper on that. We were a little worried about some of these brownouts that are happening in California, where maybe the criticism of solar would be overinvestment in solar, overinvestment in wind. I love that you say you nerd out about all of it. Can you kind of reiterate how important it is that we invest in all sectors to kind of get to that place?
Yeah, and I would say it's unfair to blame solar for those brownouts. I mean, there are transmission issues, there are other things, and I think that actually battery storage is one of the advent of battery storage in Northern California will help to ease a lot of that congestion which is happening on the grid. So, but yeah, I think the future is bright all the way around for wave technology. I talk a little bit about it in the book. Geothermal kind of making a comeback potentially. as well as obviously the wind and solar industries.
Super nerdy moment for me right now. Maybe no one else will get this, but I think you will. Are we ever going to put solar panels in geosynchronous orbit and beam the energy down to the planet, or is that just like too out there? Is that like the flying plane category?
I don't think we'll need to do it. Like we're approaching almost 1 cent per kilowatt hour production for solar. I mean, we won't need to beam it anywhere besides into the grid.
A man can dream, can't he?
I want to make one other point, Saul, and that is a plea for consistency in environmental and energy policy. One of the great challenges for a company like Impact Solutions, we were talking about this earlier before we went on, is that they think in much longer time horizons than the way elected officials do, who unfortunately are sort of caught between the few years of election. Right, and that's not what the investment horizon is, and it's not what the planning horizon is when you're talking about complicated projects that involve land use regulation and involve a lot of negotiations depending on the facility that you're building. And so what we've got to recognize is that whatever happens in 40 days from now, the margins are going to be razor thin in terms of who has the majority, whether it's Republican or Democrat. And the party can just ram through legislation or try to govern by executive order. Because for Impact Power Solutions, let's say you do an executive order that helps them, well then 4 years later, if that is rolled back, what good does that do for them? They need predictability.
And consistency.
And consistency, and that's really important for us to understand.
Well, we're closing out here. I want to ask a question to each of you, kind of a similar question. I'll give it to you, Jonathan. Can you just reiterate how we can find your organization, how we encourage more politicians to take these field trips, and then maybe in close, you can let me know what you hope we find as the Conservation Coalition on this journey, what you hope we keep finding over the next 35, 40 days.
Well, the easiest way to find us is to go to bipartisanpolicy.org. And look at our website, and you'll find about not only the work that we're doing in the energy space, but in a whole other group of policy areas ranging from agriculture to healthcare to immigration, infrastructure, transportation. What we hope to find and partner with the American Conservation Coalition on for the rest of their journey are other opportunities just like we've witnessed here today, where we can go to a company that is doing innovative things, particularly in the technological space, that is thinking futuristically, that is not just in the moment, but recognizes that we have to have long-term planning and long-term horizons, and that we can bring policy leaders like Congressman Phillips to the table and have them interact. Because I think, as you saw today, when a member of Congress is able to see something new and begin to understand it with their own eyes, and see it with their own eyes, it brings a whole new perspective, and they can go and tell their colleagues.
Well, especially when we bring a conservative like Benji to bear, and then we can make bipartisanship great again. I want that hat, by the way. I'm going to put it on your organization to design that. Send me the first one, of course. But Eric, I'm going to close out with you. Obviously, I think this was the first day you'd met Congressman Phillips. Is that correct? Yeah. How was that to kind of get this interaction? How does that kind of give you faith? And what do you hope other elected officials learn from that experience? And maybe because you're a business investors, how can we find you and get more involved in the work you're doing?
Yep, absolutely. So just to kick things off, IPS, we're at ips-solar.com. We're a commercial and industrial solar development company that does work across the country. I think what made me hopeful about today is the fact that Jonathan's here and we're talking about bipartisanship. And solar and clean energy, it's a bipartisan opportunity. We create jobs. We create jobs in rural America, jobs that can't be outsourced. Infrastructure, we are the future, of power. And I'm really optimistic that that people from both sides are starting to see this as not just a green issue, but an economic opportunity for the country.
Well, and with that, I'm going to ask you, what do you hope we find as we continue to visit different projects, bring public leaders to the conversation? What do you hope we end with it as our Odyssey closes.
I think what I'm hoping that you guys find, because there's so much to be pessimistic about in terms of what's happening with the climate, that there's a lot of optimism. And I'm optimistic because for a lot of the reasons that I just mentioned. We're seeing hockey sticks. We're in Minnesota, hockey stick analogy, but we're seeing exponential growth and opportunity in clean energy, and that is what is going to save the future of the world.
Well, we're in the land of the lakes, and to get lakes, you get rain, so I got to close out this podcast so we can save all of our equipment and get to the next location. This is the Electric Election Podcast. We've been talking about impact power solutions. We've been talking about bipartisanship. Eric, Jonathan, thank you both so much for joining us. This journey, it's still just getting started, folks. Tune on in.